today is Maria, and she is part of the Business Change Committee. She is one of the vice chairs for the group. She's a good speaker. Maria, please come.
Thank you. Thank you very much all for coming. I hope you're going to be finding it interesting. I picked this date because I hope it would be summer. The calendar didn't agree with me. The reason I decided to go into AI fairness is because I work for an organization that we are using a lot of AI. So the traditional AI, some of the generative AI. And before we had the AI Act, we started to work on how we be approaching as organization AI. And we came up with a number of principles. And one of them was fairness. So the question was, if we have this principle in the organization, how we translate that into our system? And that's a question I've had a number of times when I've been working with the GDPR project. So we have some regulatory requirements, but this is high level, and it's how an organization can do that. So what I did, starting in the pandemic, was a dissertation. It took me longer than I expected. I didn't know what I was getting into. And I also changed the topic because I started it with transparency. Then I moved into fairness, and for reasons that I'm going to be explaining soon. So myself, I'm part of the business change group, and I've been for a number of years. So I have a background in business analysis, and this is the approach I'm going to be taking for this presentation. How a business analyst with a regulatory requirement will be able to translate that. And it's also because I have a degree in law and I have worked a number of years in IT. So I have been working with IT groups, with legal teams. Now I'm part of the legal team. And I'm this translator in the middle. And it's a question that I had myself, how can we do this? So we all know the importance of fairness because of bias, because of discrimination in some groups. So going beyond that, would we even say,
can you turn the volume up from your side?
Is it low?
Yeah.
Put it in the maximum.
I'll ask.
I let you reflect on this quote. Is there even fairness? Can we even reach that? Isn't that somebody is getting something and somebody else doesn't complain? Can we get this equity or equality? As I was mentioning before, as a business analyst, I work with requirements. And many times you can see the regulatory requirements and legislative requirements, they are non-functional. This means that it gets stuck as now you do GDPR or you do fairness. There's still not translation into the specifications document. So many times I've been trying to define that, to make it functional, because that's the way we can work to that. Still, how can we translate this into a functional requirement? But this is about fairness. So it's a topic that is being talked about for centuries and centuries. And obviously it's part of ethics. And law is not just one regulation, it's a number of regulations. It's a framework itself. In the UK, we have the UK GDPR. We have PECA, which is the translation of the e-privacy directive. We have employment regulation. We have the Human Rights Act. We have the Anti-Discrimination Act. And we have to take all this into account, but also from the view of ethics. And they join in the middle. So they are not separate. You can do something that is legal, it's unethical, because the law allows you to stretch things. Now, I'll be going into that later on. One example of how difficult it is to talk about fairness is the famous trolley dilemma. This has many different forms, and it's been shown in many different scenarios. And this example comes mostly from 1976, from somebody who works in ethics. So if we have a trolley that is coming, we have a person who can decide, is it gonna go to kill 5 people if he doesn't do anything? Or it's better to kill 1? It's gonna be killing someone. There is no other way. And depending on cultures, depending on situations, it's gonna be picked one or the other. What would happen if it's a child? Person has to decide. What would happen if these are murderers? So the circumstances can change. We cannot really know by having that. So going to a bit, I mentioned at the beginning I studied law, and I studied continental law, which means I have to study Roman law. And one of the, is something we studied in the first year. And one of the things that really caught my attention is the definition of justice, which is translating the constant and perpetual will to render to every person their due. Doesn't this sound like equality? So this was in the 2nd century, 2nd, 3rd century. This was already a definition of justice. And this is also a reason why I went for fairness, because I see fairness as the base of the law, of justice. Jus in Latin means right. And is the right of the people is what is right also, what is just. So it comes in this direction, and that's why I consider fairness as a very important principle. Jumping into a most recent history and also linking with data protection, which is the job I mostly do. We've had, from the time that we started to have data protection regulations in Europe, we also start to have fair processing, lawful and fair, fair and lawfully. And we also start to say that fair is never going to be alone. It's going to be in the company of someone. It's fair data processing and unfair discrimination. Lawful and fair data processing. And we have it until, well, I have 2000 in there, which is the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. But it's also in the UK GDPR. And it's all over with different meanings. So if we are trying to get what is the meaning of fairness, you're going to be finding awareness, accessibility to information, limit of purpose, storage time, but it's also a fundamental principle. And as a principle, is all personal data will be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparent manner. And it's all and this is from the point of view of who is providing software, one controllers, it is ensuring fair and transparent processing. So transparent is to inform what it's doing, which is also linked with transparency obligation that we have in an AI Act. And this appears in the AI Act, the transparency obligation. But also lawfulness. But lawfulness is more from the point of view of regulators, from the point of view of whoever is going to be judging us, that they have to be balanced, fair, And this includes procedural fairness, fair balancing, and non-discrimination. So we start to have a number of values that are associated with fairness. There is not just one, and it's going to be very contextual, depending on where they are at the moment. Gian Claudio Malgeri, he's a researcher and he has written fantastic papers. And he wanted to know also what is fairness. So he looked into the translations of fairness into languages. And in Spanish and in French is loyalty. Okay, that's not fairness. I'm very disappointed. But we also have correctness, equitability. And what Malgeri found is that it all goes to bona fide. All these principles are related to bona fide, which is good faith. So good faith is another principle of Roman law, which in a way is you have a good intention. Is this good intention of doing something? And we are going around what fairness means. And the European Court of Justice equally balancing different interests and transparency. And then with regards to artificial intelligence, the ICO report on big data, AI, and data protection mentions the consideration effect on individuals, the expectations of data subject. This is related to transparency. So once a person knows what is going on, there is fairness because that person knows. And then the CNIL, and that's the French regulator level. This is something that we don't normally have in data protection, this collective dimension. It's one of the issues that I see with software development, the consideration of the collective, at least in the frameworks that I have seen. So the AI Act is, as fairness as a principle, is part of 7 principles, but is non-binding. So it's not something that is an obligation. Transparency is, but not fairness. And we go to ensuring that the AI system is sufficiently statistically correct and avoid discrimination. I particularly like the OECD principles because they are adhered by 47 countries. This includes the EU, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, US. So this is going to be more useful than the AI Act because it has a number of principles that have been accepted by a number of countries. And the definition of AI is the one that has been taken into the AI Act. And we see the second one, that is human rights and democratic values, including fairness and privacy. So we have seen that we can find a lot of different definitions of fairness depending on where it's found. So how can we work with that? To make it even more complicated, this was from an excellent presentation that I attended at the beginning of July. And it was Tom Sellers and Rosie Nance. And we were talking about diversity by design and AI. And this has disappeared. Oh, you cannot. And they went into looking for the definitions in the dictionary, but also what is an AI and in data protection. So for fairness, treating people equally or reasonably, procedural fairness, equal treatment within the process, outcome fairness, assessing outcomes against an expected baseline. We can see that there are a number of themes that they are recurrent. So it's treating people equally, equal treatment, but also that there is an expectation. However, we are going to be treating people, we're going to be doing things, there is an expectation of that. And then the accuracy talks about being correct without any mistakes. Then it's where we find the statistical accuracy. This is part of the ICO AI guidance. And then with regard to AI is the algorithmic fairness. Again, is the statistical and mathematical correctness of the system. And then when we go to bias discrimination and we go to equality, equity, providing everyone with what they need, which is the definition we had from Alpian from the 2nd century. So some tools that we have to translate or to position ourselves to work with all the principles in general is data protection by design and default. And for me, this is what it gives us the way to, the framework to put all the data protection principles and needs. It has everything. And what it's telling us is that the controller, which is the developer, must implement the appropriate technical organizational measures. It must comply with the principles. It's a risk-based approach, looking into the risk into the individual. And then when there are controls, that they have to be implemented in an effective manner. And it's at the time of processing, not after. So privacy by design is another way of looking at it. This was developed by Anne Cavoukian, and she was the commissioner in Canada for a very long time. And she came up with this before data protection by design and default. And is very much focused into software development. So the 7 principles is proactive, not reactive. Because you have as default setting embedded into the design, not built afterwards. Full functionality, visibility and transparency, end-to-end security, and respect for user privacy. And this is like the user-centric development. Then we are having a user. We are not looking into other implications. So that's pretty much the critique I see. Is it gives us a framework to start with, but at the same time, we cannot see all the stakeholders who can be affected by it. And ethics could help, but the thing is ethics is quite high level, and we are still having issues with code of ethics. There are still people debating meanings. There is no enforcement, and every discipline has its own definition. And I really like what Budalin said. Law is the minimum standard. So going back to what I was mentioning at the beginning, ethics is this good faith, is doing things with a good intention. Law is going to be the minimum standard. That's really fairness. So moving into artificial intelligence, I had a lot of fun creating images with DALL-E. I think it was one of them. The origins of AI, they come with human beings. In the Iliad, by Homer, probably in the 8th century or 7th century before Christ, was mentioning there was this massive, giant bronze robot that was taking care of Crete. So if there were pirates, he would go there and sort it out. And also servants that would be helping with anything, and they could have human they could be doing things that they were human. So the idea of having these robots comes from very, very long time. It's nothing new. This is closer to us, it's in the 1st century. So Heron of Alexandria created a number of automatons, at least in design. This is the design of one of them. So it's something that it keeps on going on. The normal terminology now, it comes from 1956. The term artificial intelligence during the Dartmouth summer research. And the OECD that I mentioned before defines AI as machine-based system capable of influencing the environment by producing an output. Which are the challenges? AI, because of what it does, has this invisibility, complexity, scalability, constant updating, asymmetry in access to data and expertise, generation of synthetic content and deep fakes. So that's why it's so important, particularly with artificial intelligence, that we have a framework that addresses all this. I saw this in the design. I think it's the only way where we can. And I have the great advantage of liking science fiction. Probably I'm doing this because I used to read a lot of science fiction. And Isaac Asimov talked about the 3 laws of the robotics in the 50s. First law, a robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction, a human being become to harm. A robot must obey the orders given by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third law, a robot must protect its own assistant as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. There is a third law, where Asimov changes, a robot may not injure a human being by humanity. And he left just that. There were different changes in there, but it was pretty much a robot may not injure a humanity through inaction or being to come to harm. There have been a lot of critics who have said this doesn't work, obviously. But I see it as a part of design, something I'm going to be mentioning later on. I've been giving more talks in the past, and I'm sure I have said the opposite of this. In the sense of technology as energy is nothing, right? But technology as something that we create, and it has a design, is not good, not bad, no, it's neutral. And this is the first law of technology from Campbell in 1986. Where is not the default is a fantastic TED talk that you can find from Josh Lovejoy. He's UX designer at Google. He used to be in Microsoft. And he went through a number of products that they were created by people where all the bias of the people were included. So it's the design, it's the designers themselves who introduce. So this baby was presented. And if he was saying that the baby was a girl, she would be afraid. If he was saying that the baby was a boy, he would be angry. It's the same image. So this is our own bias. And I like Paul really a lot. It goes beyond. When you create something else. Even if what you create is good. When you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. When you invent the plane, you also invent the plane crash. And when you invent electricity, you invent electrocution. Every technology carries its own negativity, which is invented at the same time as technical progress. So these are the consequences that we have to look. I couldn't avoid this with Dali. And these are the unintended consequences. This wasn't meant to do. This wasn't meant to be. We were creating a product, we were creating a system, and there is something else. The unintended consequences. This Streisand effect is a very funny one as an intended consequence. In the 80s, there was a program that was showing the erosion of the coast in California, and they showed the picture of Barbara Streisand residence. And she said, no, I don't get rid of that. I don't want my residence in this documentary. So she started to fight it in court. So everybody wanted to see what it was. So you get the opposite effect. And it's the same thing with Mario Costeja. He wanted Google to get rid of some information that was about him because it was at the time that he was bankrupt. And because he was fighting it, now everybody knows that he was bankrupt. Google is not showing it, but we all know that he was bankrupt. And the passenger side airbags in cars. The airbags can kill people. It wasn't meant to be like this. But particularly passengers, they can be pushed in a way they can get killed, particularly if they're not wearing a seatbelt. That was an unintended consequence as well. The Cobra effect is from the time that the British were in India and they were offering money for the cobras. So in the end, some people started to breed cobras because they were giving money. That wasn't the idea initially. And in Athens, there was a pollution limitation scheme, and this would mean that just the odd numbers or even numbers in the number plates were able to circulate. This meant that some people were buying two cars, and one with a number, another with an even number. And I had ULEZ in here because I've been affected by ULEZ. This means that all the cars they were working had to go. And newer cars that they are intelligent have to be bought, which means we're going to be losing privacy because of that. Mm. And externalities, someone else's problem. One example is cigarettes. Somebody smoking, somebody else is going to be getting the smoke. So the way I propose a solution is we design for values. We can see fairness as a value, transparency as a value, everything we have been talking about as a value. And cybernetics, and this was suggested by somebody who was at the BCS. So I thank him very much. There is a loop. There is this feedback loop that we normally don't have in systems we develop, that it goes beyond just the software development lifecycle. Is the feedback from the user, is the feedback from the society. This is a diagram from 1990, trying to define what is cybernetics. So design for values, what it does, it opens traditional design to more stakeholders. So it's not going to be just the user. You can have the ghost worker. You can have the hacker. You can have the very bad actor. And it expands beyond the software development lifecycle. It's not this universal morality because there's going to be a discussion. It's not going to be, I say what is fairness. There's going to be a discussion. And different stakeholders, they have to work together. I particularly like the worst outcome is a market for principles. Is what can we choose as a principle? And the definition of value is the lasting conviction of matters that people feel should be strived for in general, and not just for themselves. Be able to lead a good life with a good society. And keep on seeing the definition of Olpian in here, this good faith, something that we want for the society. So, going the proposed solution. putting everything together, it would be something like this. So what I have done is, in the 7 principles of privacy by design, that I add values. I add one more. So we look into values. And if there is somebody who is familiar with business analysis, this is POPIT. The triangle is the POPIT. So we have to take into account also the values of the organization, because the organization is going to be telling you how that principle is going to work. One thing is that you talk about fairness in cancer research. Another thing is fairness in each organization is going to have their own definition. They're going to have the policies. They're going to be having their own mission. So you would be able to align your work with the one of the organization. So it has people, information and technology, processes, and organization. So it's going to be everything that is in the organization, and you can feed from that, because that's going to be helping you for that particular case. And then the last circle is society, because we need to add society as a stakeholder. So we will be able to expand what we are doing to include organization and to include society. Much more power. So this would be how we transfer a value into a functional requirement. And there are a number of ways to solve tensions, because you're not going to have just one. This happens the whole time. You're not going to have just one principle. You're going to have a number of rather value. So cost-benefit analysis is when you can quantify things. Direct trade-off, something similar. What can you even take? But the idea always is to get to this win-win. It's not perfection, it's to be better, what it can be better, which is the minimum that we can do. So it's a conversation among all the stakeholders. When we have, for example, a multiple value conflict with multiple agent conflict, how can we improve it? And it's to have this conversation. And there are more techniques like satisficing. Satisficing is, well, maybe you don't get to what you wanted, but what is good enough? Maybe people who have worked in business analysis can see that we are talking a bit of prioritization of requirements, or even risk specification. So again, it's a conversation among the stakeholders. Maybe we can do something different. Maybe we can call it. And also innovation. Dumps and flows. Dumps and flows, it would be mapping the user journey in what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So the dumps are not acceptable, the flows are acceptable. So we are breaking down more and more what the principle is. And moral imagination. This is where my friend Asimov comes. And this is about asking ourselves, what if? And this is how we expand also, how we are designing, how we are working in that. What might happen if this technology is widely successful? The people from OpenAI thought of that? What if phones but too much? This is allegedly the premise of Black Mirror. How could this technology fail? How could someone abuse this technology? Has this situation happened before in another field? What happened next? So it's opening a lot of conversation and making the design phase very, very large. But there is not just one way to see things. So featuring of all the possibilities of all that it could happen over time, what is preferable, probable, plausible, and particular like provocatypes and prototypes. I found two names. This is a prototype that is to make people think. It's not a normal prototype. It could be a prototype of something horrid. Currently, this is the prototype of a site for health in Finland. It's horrid, isn't it? That's the idea. It is made with Comic Sans, font is in fuchsia, but this is to present it to the users and tell them, what do you think about that? And you can get more information than having just a normal prototype, because that's horrid. Did I pass too? So defining fairness is complex and quite contextual. It is gonna really depend on situations, on organizations, on the particular product. But the design can help embed fairness in AI and always be situated in the societal context. This particular prototype is from 2009. And it was to make people think about what happens when there is so much CCTV. So this is a dog that it has a mask, and instead of smelling normally as a dog would do, can smell when there is no electromagnetic fields. And apparently when they tested it, it was very good with children. Children liked that, but it makes people think. And this is from 2009, a long time ago. And also the AI coach. Another possibility. So I end up with fairness, like I started. Why fairness? Is for confidence, trust, resolution of issues. It's also because each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare society as a whole can override. Thank you. Questions? Questions?
Provocatypes and prototypes. Can you differentiate the two terms?
The same thing is depending on the authors, but it's exactly the same thing. I find provocatype comes from Ken Bowles. He wrote a book called Future Ethics, and it's fantastic with all the how to be ethical in design. But I have found that it's a term that he uses, whereas prototype is maybe the term that is more widely used.
We've got a problem with generative AI in tech companies like OpenAI, trained on copyright data and open data. On the one hand, you've got numerous companies like New York Times taking Microsoft and OpenAI to court because our premium products were very expensive to use, like New York Times, using that material, and they claim unfairly. On the other hand, you've got artists that take advantage of generative AI because they want to produce electronic art and which they can reproduce thousands of copies using their own style and generate an income. So how do we resolve that tension?
With regard to copyright, there are a number of court cases going on. So it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen it's gonna be pretty much from the side of law. In the US, there is something called the fair use. So there is something that you can use. And in the past, before AI, there have been already cases of plagiarism because something is similar to something. The complexity that we have with AI is, which is the moment that we have information or not. It's been ingested, that's quite clear. It's been scraped in a country where it can be done. In the US, they can't do this. In Europe, it's a different matter, but they trained it in the US. And then the fact that afterwards is converted into maths is where it's making it more complicated. And I've been following a bit of that, in which way we are going. There are some lawyers that they are suggesting that whatever we get with generative AI is a draft. It cannot be taken seriously. That's one of the positions. But also I'm seeing that they're starting to differentiate that part. Is even if they can afterwards reproduce it back. So I think it's something that is going to be taking some time. The copyright is something that is affecting the organization where I work and myself because I'm a photographer. So I would be feeling quite uncomfortable if what I have is trained. But obviously there's going to be a lot of stuff. There has been a lot of stuff that has been already used to train. But it's going to be coming mostly from courts and maybe depending on countries. Because I think in Japan, it's all open field, as far as I know. But if you are interested in more information, let me know. Here my detail. And I can follow up.
Thank you.
Steve.
Are we expecting systems with AI to be more ethical and more legally compliant than systems than everything else without it?
I think it depends on the organization. So we have regulations, we have ethics frameworks, but it's going to be depending on the enforcement. Many organizations that are going to be trying to go as far as they can. Because there are organizations that they want to make money. So it's depending on which is the enforcement that we are going to be getting from courts. That's my guess.
We have one question online. How do we know what version, definition of fairness has been implemented in the AI?
In the AI, there is not really fairness definition. You can find it in a number of recitals. So it's not part of the legislative body. So what I have found is that it's something that is voluntary. So that's so far. It's more important transparency. But the thing is, because we have seen transparency so close to fairness many times, I think indirectly, we are going to be getting into that. So I would be looking into the transparency principle.
Hi, could you tell us a little bit more maybe about how UK government tries to protect British users, people here, and their digital rights when using generative AI or any other AI application, maybe the UK AI office? Are there any frameworks that are coming into place like EU AI Act? And also considering a lot of those large AI companies are coming out of the US, and there's often very hard actually to make them comply with the local laws. Is there anything that you could share?
We were not going to have absolutely anything with regards to regulation with the previous government. And it looks like with this government, we may get regulation. It looks like we are all waiting to see which is the priorities that they have with regards to frameworks. Something that we had in place before, it was that the different regulators, the ICO for data protection, the FCA for financial, Ofcom for communications, they would have their own framework. And then they would be meeting. So I showed before what the ICO had with regards to AI. So their frameworks is something that I think is a bit complicated because it's a lot of different regulators that they have to be coming together. And in the moment of enforcement, I don't really know how they're going to be doing it because it may be more than one regulator tackling an issue from a different perspective. But we do. It's not regulation, but is guidance. And what is important also is which is the level of enforcement. And what I can tell you as well is in one of the IAPP data protection conferences that we had here in the UK not long ago, the current commissioner, John Edwards, said that we have the GDPR, which still applies. And when the GDPR, maybe also responding to the person who was talking about fairness in the AI Act, because there is fairness in GDPR, it's also affecting AI because personal data is still has to be complied with GDPR, no matter what. It's just another technology.
We have another one here. AI and machine learning is still very complex and complicated. To be explainable in the future, how can we be sure that the models are currently fair and explainable?
This is a PhD question. Is the constant looking into is the feedback loop. And that's something that we also have in the AI Act. Once we have a system, an AI system that has been deployed, it's not that we just leave it. We have to keep on checking it. We have to keep on checking that keeps on being fair because the results may change with time, may change with data, and maybe it starts to be biased. So that's one of the obligations of the providers. More questions?
I thought your early analysis of what fairness meant was fascinating, but I'm left uncertain as to where you took us. Is fairness a useful concept in the way many of the questions that you've heard are thinking of AI? Or is the fact that it's based on an articulation of some ideas from the 2nd century helpful at all? Because it seems to me that's a very different world. And what a person means in that translation and what is due seems to be very questionable as well. So I'm asking for some guidance as to where you think fairness is taking us.
What I believe that fairness is taking us is to discuss what it is, each and every case. So this is what I mean by giving to everybody is due. For me, it's not discrimination, is to don't forget someone. But the different definitions that we have in regulation is with something else, is contextual. And in the framework that I'm proposing is a value that we have to define based on the framework of an organization. Does this help?
Is it very different from, say, you know, fairness in UX UI design?
In which sense?
Well, the examples you gave were to do with the different individuals that were to be catered for here. Are they being catered for, or have their due, to use that early idea? It doesn't seem to me to be particularly about AI, but about the use of computing technology.
Is a framework that is not particularly for that, but is for values. One of the values is fairness, because fairness is not going to be on its own. It's not going to be the only value. We're going to have another values in the organization. We're going to have transparency. We're going to have lawfulness. So I put fairness because is how I got into that framework. But we're going to have the other values. That's why I was mentioning how we're going to be working with the tension with other values and with the definition of fairness that we're going to be in a particular.
May I have another one, please? Another question? Yeah,
I don't have any question here, but I have some comments from earlier. Yeah, please do.
so, forgot them for a moment. Please go on with your comments. I'll come back to me. I'm sorry.
From Stephen, he said, it's interesting to note that in employment law, there is no requirement to employers to be fair, instead to be reasonable, which a much lower bar.
Employment regulations, I don't know if it's employment regulation, but we have the something related to the Discrimination Act, so it is no discrimination. So I think in the UK, what we have is non-discrimination, as we have in the US for employment law as well. That would be the way they see fairness, do not discriminate.
I did remember, but he can go first.
I would like to propose that we change the title of your talk to applied intelligence. Fairness by default.
Applied.
Applied intelligence, so that it encompass both artificial and natural intelligence. And my question for you is, how do you think your presentation would change if we were to look at it from the perspective of applying both artificial and natural intelligence?
Let me go back to the framework. There is an organization. So if we take the organization, we take society, the rest is privacy by design. What do you change in, maybe is the inner circle? Would you still use it for?
Well, I'm suggesting that if we're using people to do things, then we may be drawing the threshold to some very different levels than we are expecting artificial intelligence to do things. And I think that there's a little bit of a blind spot that we're applying in all of these discussions about AI ethics and AI fairness and AI transparency. When a person makes a decision, that is by no means transparent. We don't know how our brains work. We can't describe how that decision was made. Yeah, so we now then say, we put into law that AI decisions must be transparent. How do we get there? When we have people and they bring with them all manner of biases. Yeah, and we let them go ahead and do a job, and most of the time, we just let them go ahead and do the job. We don't even measure the important things most of the time. So we're creating, on the one hand, this sort of framework to address an issue that we haven't actually even addressed for people.
That's why it's so important to have, where do I have it? The different stakeholders. You're meant to be talking to a lot of people. And this is where the bias that somebody can have is shown by somebody else. This is where diverse teams talking to not just users, anybody who could be impacted by that. And that's something that we have in Design for Values. So it really expands the amount of stakeholders because the bias is there, definitely. That's why we need to expand.
It does. I particularly like one of your earlier quotes, the Yellowstone one. the Yellowstone quote.
But there's no fairness.
It's what you can get away with without someone complaining. And I think that we'll hear an awful lot more of that. Because that's what we do anyway.
So my question was about what do you think is influencing this discourse? You many times during your talk referred to the AI Act. What do you believe what impact do you think it's going to have? Particularly, there's a question here about the UK situation. What do you think the AI Act is how is it going to influence how we think about it?
Some people expect the Brussels effect. This is what happened with the GDPR. All the rest of the countries following in one way or another. It's going to definitely influence the EU because that's the regulation. It will be influencing us, UK, whenever we are having systems that they're going to be the EU. And same thing with other countries. The difference with the AI Act now is that there are many different frameworks around already. And the EU, they are fantastic in creating laws. And this is the AI is particularly complex because it's not just about software, it's about product safety. And the fact that this product safety is making it more difficult to be adapted in other countries, they would have to remove that. That's why I mentioned the OECD principles. So I work for a global organization. We will have in all the world the different regulations. And that's what we have. We have principles. And that's how I came up with this. We have principles. We don't have the same regulation across the world. That was even before the AI Act was approved. And that's what we are doing with data protection as well. We have a number of principles. We have different regulations. When I'm talking to engineers, they want to know what we have to do. They don't want to know completely understand because I was doing that before. So it's possible that some global organizations, they're going to be following the AI Act, and this means affecting us because it would be like a baseline. It's possible. But maybe others will try to see what they can get away with. It's going to depend on the enforcement.
How effective really is all these attempts to regulate AI, considering that big corporations like OpenAI, they are willing to go into lawsuits and not allowing that to prevent them from developing the technology, and also from the standpoint of the governments. I think there is a bit of contradiction in the motivation in terms of there is a need to regulate all this technology, but at the same time, there's competition here, that, for example, the UK wants to compete with the US and China in terms of developing. So all those forces at work, I wonder how effective really is the attempts to regulate AI.
What it happens in the US is that the regulation is completely different from we have in here and is very much pro-innovation. So we can have OpenAI going very quickly. At the same time, they have regulators with teeth. The FTC has given a number of fines that they were really scary, and they can really ask organizations to delete data. They can do that. And it's in a way I haven't seen in Europe. We have some regulators like CNIL in France, particularly the one that we have in Italy, the ones that they stopped ChatGPT for 1 month in Italy. Everybody was using VPN.
First VPN.
And they are still. I was in a conference at the beginning of July, and there was one of the commissioners from Italy reminding us all the principles they have to follow. In Italy, they would do it. I lived in there, they do these things. And we also had the general counsel from OpenAI. And he must be earning a lot of money. So it's about looking at the law. And it's about what you can do with the law, what I mentioned before. So they have they find ways within the laws to do things. And they have their own definitions of what is fair. I mean, they say that they scraped, but now there is no personal data. There is not. Or IP for that matter. And then they're going to be sued by someone. They're going to go to court. And it goes pretty much like that. And in many cases, it can be political as well. It's one of the comments I heard from US lawyers, because having regulation in Europe, obliging big technologies from other parts of the world to follow our regulations is giving the EU competitive advantage. So there are many different dimensions to that.
We have some comments here from David. Regulation tends to be. If the AI is transparent, it should be easier to audit or reflect on on why a decision was made with human, and it is less easy to determine.
There is, with regards to transparent, and that's one of the requirements of the AI Act, and it's really a requirement. For this expectation I was mentioning before, somebody is expecting knowing what it is. You can find this is also on the GDPR in Article 22, the automating decision making. So it has to be giving individuals knowledge of what it is. It has to allow the individuals the possibility of having a person who's going to be deciding what it has when the decision has legal or similar effects. But at the same time, I think I passed it because I was passing some of the things quickly. There is a researcher here, UCL, Michael Veal, and he has been writing a number of papers with regards to AI. And he didn't think that transparency would be 100% useful as such as explaining, because we can also explain how we want. So what he was proposing is that we follow privacy by design because we have to embed it. So if we embed in the design, the explanation, we can always say whatever we want to say. And an example of the transparency obligation is privacy notices. Who reads privacy notices here? This is, in theory, how transparency principle is fulfilled. So if it were clear, and also when they can, because if you have a black box and you have deep learning, I don't know if this is the right terminology, you don't know. An engineer doesn't know. It's just the machine learning itself. How can you explain that?
This means that AI makes it easier for organizations to meet their compliance obligations.
If you're looking into compliance, merely compliance is part of the law, you could. But are you ethical? Are you fair? That's a different matter. Any questions? So would you like to have some Thank you very much all.
We'll let you know next week about our event in August, if it's going on. If not, the next event after that is 17th of September, Maria.
17th, yes, it's online.